Hi folks, it's Larry Talks, March 9th, 2021. The topic today is access to voting as opposed to voting rights. There's a difference between the access to vote and the right to vote. We all have the right to vote, given to us by Abraham Lincoln. But access is being denied right and left by the Republicans in 135 laws that have been passing in the last week. To give you a few examples of laws that in Georgia are being passed today. One is you can't give people food or drink in line waiting to vote. It's against the law in Georgia. 2, you can't vote on Sunday because blacks vote on Sunday and we don't want them to vote, so we're outlawing that. We're going to close the polls an hour earlier. Another example, the most outrageous one, I think, is the one in Texas, which they enforced. They made a law or a policy during the last election to have a polling place that had 1 million people to vote in this one place. I live in California. I've never waited more than a minute to vote in my lifetime. Those people in Texas, the lines were so long they couldn't even vote. And that was legal, they think. I think the Supreme Court would say no. In fact, they just had an argument before the Supreme Court, and Trump's most conservative woman lawyer said, sounds to me like that's suppressing the vote. And he said, no, it isn't. We won't win if we don't do this. So the Republicans have admitted that their purpose is to repress voting. Of course, they repress themselves, too, which that's pretty stupid, but that's Republicans. I want to give you a little historical background here of this whole issue. Again, my question here in this 12-minute program is, what is the difference between the access to vote and the right to vote? The right to vote is given to all of us, all men, in the 14th Amendment when blacks got the vote by an amendment, and that implied that all other men did too. And then women got it in 1919. And all the other, I'm sure you've heard that only in the early days, only people with property men with property were allowed to vote. And that's true. So why did that happen, and how did that change? Well, first of all, we're not a democracy. We're a republic. That's what the Founding Fathers wanted. In fact, the first 2 presidents were not voted by the people. They were voted by Congress. And that's the way the rich wanted it. That's the way the plantation owners and slave owners wanted it. And they got what they wanted. But here's the problem. First of all, I want to say the earliest statement about democracy came from the people, and it's in the preamble to the Constitution. I'm amazed that the Founding Fathers let this by. Here, and as a child, I memorized this, and I still remember it. What does the preamble to the Constitution say? Opens with the words, "We the people, in order to secure the blessings of liberty upon us and upon our children, do ordain this Constitution of the United States." So that's an assertion of democracy, that government represents the people. And then you go to Lincoln, who at the Gettysburg Address said, we're in a great civil war to find out whether this democracy can long endure, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. That's the second great assertion. And of course, the 14th Amendment in the Constitution says all men can vote. The next assertion, which nobody seems to know about, happened in 1913. What was it? It was the founding of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, which some people claim has never been constitutional or never amended, has no right. I don't know. I guess Congress must have established that by law. So I don't know how legal it is. A lot of people say it isn't legal. Nonetheless, I fund the government. Presidents haven't paid taxes in a long time. Walmart doesn't pay any taxes. I do. I pay thousands of dollars in taxes. So shouldn't I have representation? Shouldn't I have access to voting? Shouldn't it be as easy for me to vote as it is to go to the store and buy something or go to the bank? Since I'm funding the bank, since I own the bank, since the government buildings and all, I pay for all of it. They just spent $1.7 trillion, almost the amount we did on the COVID thing, on a plane they're not going to use. That was pure profit for the armament people. $1.7 trillion. And they've decided, I saw this on the news, they're not going to use this plane. They decided it's obsolete already. But boy, they got the profits, didn't they? That's my money, your money. It's not Trump's money because he didn't pay any taxes. Walmart didn't pay any taxes. They got lawyers to cover them. So that's the third thing, why we think it's a democracy. We pay for it, we own it, we should have representation. Seems reasonable, doesn't it? But there's no amendment, there's no law that says that. It's the whole, what would you say, assumption of the people that we do have that right. So those are the three things historically. Now there's another really, really, really important thing about the history of voting. It's very, very complex. And the reason is this. There's a paragraph early on in the Constitution that says this. If the only rights, the power that the federal government has are those powers expressly stated in the Constitution, given to the federal government. Those are the only powers the federal government have. All other powers are reserved to the states. That's how voting laws ended up being something the states do. Of course, the amendment to the Constitution, all it did was affirm what it was states had already said, that men and eventually women had the right to vote. The states did that. Well, actually, the 19th Amendment did it for women, and the 14th did it for men. So it is in the Constitution that we have the right to vote. But what about access? That's a different story. I think access should be, as I say, as easy as going to the store, since I own the store, since I pay for the store, since I pay for everything in government. I ought to have representation. So right now we're having a civil war. The Republicans are passing state laws saying we don't want people to vote and we're going to repress it in every way that we can. And the Democrats have already made a law, but it doesn't say anything about access. It does imply some access rights, but it doesn't say what access to voting is. And so nobody set a standard. Maybe the Supreme Court will eventually. Again, this program is about this question. And we're going to be fighting for this for the next 6 months at least. That is, what is the reasonable access, what's the standard for reasonable access to voting? As opposed to the right to vote. No one's questioning that. The Republicans aren't, the Democrats aren't, the states aren't. Why? Because everybody has that right at the age of 21 or 18 or whatever. I think it's 18. Different states have different laws. But what is the standard for access? That has never been defined, and that's what we're going to be doing in the next year in Congress and in state governments. So pay attention, say what you think, try and figure it out for yourself. What do you think access should be, since you're paying for everything? You pay for it more than Walmart or presidents. So shouldn't you have access? And are we a democracy? In some ways, I've said how we are. how we've asserted it over our history, and boy, are we in trouble trying to figure this out. At least I'm glad that we are trying to argue it. So it's been 10 minutes. I'm done. That's all I have to say. How dare I say this? Well, it's because I taught college ethics and political philosophy for 10 years, and I followed the news all my life, so that's why I think I have something articulate to say about the nature of the access to vote and the difference between that and the right to vote. Very different things. No one is questioning the right to vote. Everybody is questioning right now, what should access mean? And so you need to think about that and decide for yourself and tell people what you think. Because in the next year or so, we're going to be fighting this out. My next program will be on the gap between the rich and the poor. So if you want to respond to this, you can respond on YouTube. Let's see, how do I save this?